Hashem, Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Shevuos daf Tes, Shevuos 29. Today's daf yomi is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim and Saul for the Shuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and Seis Sarah. We're going to start at the Mishnah on 29a. The Mishnah says, Ezohi Shvuos Shav. What's the definition of a Shvuos Shav? We've been talking about Shvuos Bitoy up until now, but now we talk about Shvuos Shav. And the Gemara, the Mishnah is going to have several scenarios. Number one is Nishbal Shanos Esayadua Adam. You take an oath to about something that's obviously not true. Amar Allah Amod Shalavan Shusal. You say that about a pillar of stone that it's gold. Now Ish Shu Isha, or you say about a person who's obviously a man, that he's a woman. Val Isha, about a woman, she Ish. Or a woman that she's a man. Nishbal Davar Shi Afshalo. If you swear about something, it's an impossibility. Like, for example, you say, now, unless I saw a camel flying in the sky, impossible for camels to fly. Or if I didn't see like a snake that looks like an olive press. In all these cases, these is what's called a Shevuos Shav. Amar La'edim, if he says to witnesses, Bovi Duni, if he says to witnesses, come and testify for me, and the witnesses Shavuos Shalon Nidach, and the witnesses respond by saying, we take an oath that we will not come and testify for you. Not that we don't know the testimony, that will be next chapter, that's what's called Shavuos Ha'edus, but that we will not come. They're swearing to nullify a mitzvah. So that's the third type of Shevuos Shav. We see him here. First of all, you swear that something that everybody knows is true is not true. Number two is you swear about something that's impossible, like a camel flying in the sky. Number three, you're swearing to nullify a mitzvah. And the nishba avato is a mitzvah. You're swearing to nullify the mitzvah. Shalua so sukkah, not to make a sukkah, which is not actually a mitzvah. It's called a hechsher mitzvah. Even that is called a Shevuos Shav. Shaloi to lulav, not to take a lulav. V'shaloi anil tefillin, not to wear tefillin. Zui Shevuos Shav. These are all examples of Shevuos Shav. Shechayavin al zedona makos, al shegagasa pater, that you're liable if you do it intentionally for lashes, and accidentally you get nothing. Unlike a Shevuos Bitoy, where if you do it accidentally, you have to bring a carbon over your rate. A Shevuos Shav, if you do it accidentally, you're pater. Let's say you say Shevuos she'ochel kikar zu, you take an oath and I'm going to eat this piece of bread, and then you say Shevuos shelo ochlena, and then you say an oath, actually I'm not going to eat it. Then Arishona Shevuos Bitoy, the first one is called the Shevuos Bitoy. It's an oath that I'm going to eat something. And the second one is Shevuos Shav. And the second one, where you're nullifying a mitzvah, that's Shevuos Shav, because you now have a mitzvah to eat that, or you have an obligation to eat that loaf of bread. So when you take an oath that you're not going to eat it, that's a Shevuos Shav. Achal, let's say you eat it, Avral Shevuos Shav. You're violating the Shevuos Shav. Gemara is going to point out, actually, even if you don't eat it, you're violating the Shevuos Shav. Well, Achla, if you don't eat it, Avral Shevuos Bitoy, you're violation of Shevuos Bitoy. So now the Gemara says, Amar Ua v'hushin nikar l'gimel b'nei Adam. Ua says that what do we say is the Shevuos Shav if you swear that a pillar of stone is of gold? That's only if it's obvious to three people. Rashi says, let's say it's not recognizable, then it's not a Shevuos Shav, but it's a Shevuos Sheker. It's a false oath. And then why do we care? We already said 3 days ago, Rashi says on top of Amma Beis, because it depends upon, you need to have properly warned for each sin before you do it. So you need to know if it's a Shevuos Shav or Shevuos Sheker. Nishbal davar she'ef shalo, and lo ra'isi gamal parech ba'avir. So the Gemara says, the language of the Mishnah said, I did not see a camel flying in the air. So the Gemara says, Shevuos she'ra'iti lo kamer. He doesn't say an oath that I saw. He says an oath that I did not see. Mayim lo ra'isi. What do you mean an oath that I did not see? Clearly did not see a camel flying in the air. So Abaye Amar Tani Shevuos she'ra'iti. No, Abaye says, yeah, that's accurate. Say an oath that I saw. Rava says, but Omer, no. What he says is, he said, what he actually said was that all the fruits in the world be prohibited to me, unless I saw a camel flying in the sky. That's what basically, and so that's called the Shevuos Shav. So it says Ravina, Amoy Ravina, how do we know he didn't really see a camel flying in the sky? Amoy Ravina Ravashi. Dilma Hai Gavra Tzipora Rava Chazi. He saw a big bird. He didn't know the name. But asked the question, he called this big bird camel. Maybe since in his mind he was thinking that he saw something that he calls a camel, then he's not doing a false oath. And the Gemara says, no, we don't care about that. The Gemara says, and if you want to say, and if you want to say, well, we don't care what he said, what he thought, we care what he said, but we have a problem with that. So that when we make him take an oath, well, we say to him, have a yodea shelo al datcha no mashpin otcha el al datenu val das bezdin. When he takes an oath, we say, we want to uproot this possibility. We say, be very certain, we're not making you take an oath on what we have in mind, but rather on the das of the bezdin. Meaning to say, we're in the bottom of Chav Tesam and Aleph now, around 15 lines from the bottom. My time, what's the reason when we comes to court, we remind the guy that it's not what you think, it's what we think, because Dilma is Gundri Yavle. Maybe he's giving him some pieces of wood. And in his mind, he says, I call this money. So that when he takes the oath, it's on his intent. So we see from here, we have to warn him that it's not on your intent, but it's what we think. But other than that, if we didn't warn him, he would be able to say, it's what I was thinking. And so therefore, we see from here the concept that it depends upon what the guy's thinking, not what he says. Gemara says, no, that case is different. Hasa mishum kanya derava. No, that case is, we're not worried about that he's going to think something differently than what he actually says, and therefore that would be, he would be saying a valid oath, but rather we're worried about actual fraud. Like the case of the Kanya de Rava and the Darim Chafei, what happened there was that Rava, that somebody came before Rava into the Bezdin, and he gave his stick to the person, and in the stick he had secretly hidden money. And he had said, I gave you the money, because he gave him the stick which had the money. And then the man got so upset, and he threw the stick down and broke it and revealed this plot. So there we're trying to forestall that fraud. But it's not that the idea that you could just think something and then we go after what you're thinking rather than what the actual words mean to the rest of the world. Toshma, the Gemara again brings a proof about this. Moshe Rabbeinu made the Bnei Yisrael take an oath that they're going to keep the Torah before he died. Amro, and he says to them, he says, no, recognize that it's not on the basis of your own intent, your own mindset that I'm making you take an oath. I'm not making you take I'm not making you take an oath on the basis of what you think, but on the basis of what God thinks and what I think. So we see from here that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying it's not on the basis of what you think, but it's the basis of what I think and what God thinks. Why did Moshe have to say this to? Moshe could have just said to them, Kimu Maida Amar Aloha, keep the words of God. And so from the fact that he didn't say that, La Mishum Demaskia Datayu, isn't it because we were concerned that when they said that we might have thought that they would have said that they had in mind idolatry. And so we see from here that it's not on the basis of words, but on the basis of what you're thinking. And so therefore Moshe had to undo that possibility. Gemara says, no, it's because no, because he was making them take an oath to God, but actually the words themselves mean that, because idolatry can also be referred to as God. The word Eloah, a God of silver and gold. So therefore, since the words can mean the same thing, therefore Moshe had to make sure they didn't have that in mind. Why did Moshe say He could have said, Kimu Torah, just keep the Torah. So the Gemara said, no, maybe they would have had in mind Chada Torah. Maybe they would have had in mind just the written Torah, not the oral Torah. Maybe he would have said to them, we'll keep both Torahs. Well, then maybe they would have said, no, that it has in mind Torah Chatas and Torah Hashem, just the Torah Chatas and Hashem. But the Gemara says, well, maybe he would have said to them, Kimu Kol Torah Kula. He could have said that. The Gemara says, no, Avodas Kochavim. No, that because the idolatry, maybe they would have just had in mind not to worship idolatry. The Amar Mara Chamura Avodas Kochavim. Idolatry is so strict. Shekoa Kofar Ba Kamoda B'Kol Torah. Whoever rejects idolatry is accepting the whole Torah. Well, maybe he could have said to them, Kimu Mitzvah. Maybe he would have said to them, just keep the mitzvah. So then, Chada mitzvah kind. So then they might have just kept one mitzvah. Maybe he would have said to them, mitzvos, keep the mitzvos. Tarti, that's just mitzvahs. So maybe Moshe would have said to them, they can oath for kol mitzvahs kulan. Keep all the mitzvos. No, mitzvos tzitzis. No, that perhaps is just a reference to the mitzvah of tzitzis. As we state in the Gemara, as Rashi says, well, I'll read the next line. Shkua mitzvos tzitzis kineged kol mitzvos kulan. The whole mitzvah of that the mitzvah of tzitzis is equivalent to all the mitzvahs in the Torah. Rashi explains because it says there's a chartim is called mitzvos Hashem. Remember all the mitzvahs of God, and the gematria of tzitzis is 600, and then you have 8 strings and 5 knots, so it's 613. So if he had just said keep all the mitzvos, then it might have been interpreted to mean just the mitzvah of tzitzis. But why didn't he just say to them, keep all 613 commandments? And then it'd be very clear what it means. But according to your logic, he should have just said, why does he need to say on the knowledge of God and my knowledge? It should have just been one. He didn't need both. So we're in top of 29b. So the reason why he said it was nothing to do with making sure that they didn't have in mind something else, but it had to do with the fact that he wanted to make an oath that could never be revoked. And so therefore he do it in public. As we went to the end of Makos, that if the Shevuos on Das Acherim, on the mindset of others, you can never annul it. You can never go to the Chacham and annul it. When on top of 29b, it says that he takes an oath in Ra'iti, Nachash Kekora space about. He says, I take an oath that I never saw a snake the size of an olive press. Vulo, is that really such an impossibility that we call it a Shevuos Shav? Vahuda Bishnei Shavor Malka. There was once a snake in the years of Shavor the king. Avechad de Ichzik Tleisar Arvase Tivne. There was one snake that was so big it could swallow up to 13 bales of stray, or 13 stables of horses filled with straw. That's what Rashi says. And Rashi explains that it used to swallow human beings. And how did they actually capture it? This is based upon a Yerushalmi, that the Yerushalmi says that what they did was they made bundles of straw and they put wild animals into them and they hid fire inside it. And so they put the animals in there and they put the fire in it. And when he swallowed the animals, he also swallowed the fire and he died. That's how they killed the snake. So anyway, we see there is such a snake. Why does the Mishnah give that as an example of the impossible? So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel b'taraf. No, it has the ridges on it. Well, kulinami mitraf trifin. All the snakes have the ridges on them. Mishagavo taraf. He said that it was ridged along its back, and typically speaking, the snake doesn't have these ridges on the back, but only on the throat. Rashi said. If a person takes an oath that I will eat this loaf of bread, and then he takes an oath afterwards that I will not eat it, and the second one is called a Shevuos Shav, the first one is a Shevuos Bitoy. So the Gemara asked, the Mishnah made it sound that if he eats it, he violates his Shvuah Shav. Gemara says, but Hashem Mishum Shvuas Bitoy Machayev Mishum Shvuas Shav or Machayev. So if he eats it, it had said in the Mishnah, it had said in the Mishnah that if he doesn't eat it, he violates Shvuas Bitoy, which implies that if he doesn't eat it, he does not violate Shvuas Shav. But Shvuas Shav, he really violates on the second he says it because he was Nishbal Avato, it's a mitzvah. So that's why the Gemara says, Hashem Mishum Shvuas Bitoy. If he doesn't eat it, he's liable for Shvuas Bitoy, but Mishum Shvuas Shav, he's not liable for Shvuas Shav. Harayatza Shvuas Shav, he already said the oath, and the oath was a Shvuas Shav. So I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah, Tani Afal Shvuas Bitoy. No, in that case where he doesn't eat it, in addition to being liable for Shvuas Shav, he's also liable for Shvuas Bitoy. That's how Rabbi Yirmiyah explained it. Says the Mishnah, brings us to the last Mishnah, and Shvuas Shtayim, Shvuas Bitoy Noheges Banashim Uvinashim, and this is all these things are being said because the next chapter these laws don't apply because it's Shvuas Ha'edus. Shvuas Ha'edus does not apply to women. It's a testimony about it's an oath about testimony which women are not obligated. It doesn't apply to relatives if you make the oath from relatives because relatives doesn't apply to Shvuas Ha'edus. So we say Shvuas Bitoy Noheges Banashim Uvinashim. This Shvuas Bitoy applies to men and women, bikrovim or chokim. Also, if you take an oath about a relative or non-relative, it applies. Piksher and psulim, whether or not you're kosher for edus. Bifnei bezin, shelo bifnei bezin, whether or not you're in front of a court. Mipiatzmo, if he says the oath on his own. V'chayavin also dona makos val shagagas carbon all of the urid. And if you do it intentionally, you get lashes. Accidentally, for Shvuas Bitoy, you bring carbon all of the urid. So to Shvuas Shav, no hagas ba'nashim u'v'nashim v'chokim u'v'krovim u'ksherin u'psulim b'fnei bezin v'shalom b'fnei bezin u'mipiatzmo. So the same thing by Shvuas Shav. V'chayavin al zedono malchos v'al shigasa pater. The big difference is in Shvuas Shav, if you do it accidentally, you get nothing, whereas Shvuas Bitoy, you bring a carbon all of the urid. Achazu v'achazu. Next line in the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to point out, it seems to contradict what we just said, but both the Shvuas Bitoy and the Shvuas Shav, Hamushpa mipi acherim chayev. Others make you take an oath, and presumably you say, Amen, you're liable. Where we had said in the earlier clause that, which implies that the earlier one, it says here, Hamushpa mipi acherim chayev, which seems to cut against the earlier clause of the Mishnah, as they're going to say. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Mi piatzma." What's the definition of one who takes an oath from their own? Shamotzi hu shvua mi piv. That he himself says the entire oath, like it says in the verse. And also it applies if others take the oath and he says, Amen. Kitakatani seifa. Like it says in the clause we just read. The case if others make you take an oath and you just say Amen, you're also liable. Both by Shvuas Bitoy, Shvuas Edif, if others make you take the oath, you're liable. But if you don't say Amen, you're exempt. What's the example? Going Mashpiani Alecha, I make you take an oath in Machalta and Lo Achalta that you ate or you did not eat. Amar Lo Achalti or Lo Achalti, he says I ate or I did not eat, but he doesn't say I swear, so he doesn't say the actual shul, and he doesn't say Amen, so then he would not be liable. We'll see in the Gemara that it makes that point. Lo Achalti Ayom, Lo Anachti Tefillin Ayom. Let's say a person says I did not eat today or I did not put on tefillin today. Mashpiachad, he says, take an oath for Amar Amen, and he says Amen. Well, that's Shmuel Mipiacherim, and he's chayiv, he's liable. Says Shmuel, a law which we'll see is actually capable of being inferred from the Mishnah, so it's not a chiddush, but he tells us how to read the Mishnah. Shmuel says, Ona Amen Achar Shvua Kemotzi Shmuel Mipivdami. If you just say, if somebody says, I make you take an oath, and you just say Amen, then it's like you enunciated the oath and you're liable. And what's the source for this idea of Shmuel? It says by the woman who's accused of being a sota. She says they make her. They take an oath in front of her. They read the curses, and then she says Amen, Amen. So we see from here. That Amen is the equivalent of taking the oath. Amar Papa Mishmein Derava Masnisinu Brisa Nami Deka. We can infer this also that Amen is the equivalent of taking an oath from a Mishnah and a Brisa. Deka the Katani, and this is the next Mishnah at the beginning of the next chapter. The Katani Shevuos Ha'edus no Hagis Ba'Nashim or B'Nashim. The Shevuah about that you don't know testimony that applies to men and not women. Berchokim lo b'krovim, b'ksherim lo b'sulam. The ain't no Hagis el b'ruyin la'ahayid, and it only applies somebody is capable of being a witness. Ubifnei bezdin v'shalo b'fnei bezdin v'piatzma. It only applies on his own in front of the court, or not in front of the court. Meaning to say it applies in front of the court, or even not in front of the court on his own. But if others make him take the oath, others make him take the oath, he's only liable if he rejects it in the court. Divrei Rebbe Meir. So anyway, we see from from this position of Rebbe Meir, that according to Rebbe Meir, the oath, if somebody else who makes you take an oath and you just say amen, it doesn't apply outside of court. Outside of court, you have to take the oath on your own. Inside court, you could just say amen, but outside of court, it doesn't work. But we learned in the Brisa, Vitanya Brisa, we learned in the Brisa, Shevuos Ha'edus Ketzad. What is Shevuos Ha'edus? Amro Edem Bovi do. He say, come and testify for me. Shevuos She'enanu Yodin Cha'edus. They say we don't know testimony. Osha Amro Einanu Yodin Cha'edus. Or they said we don't know testimony. Mashpi'ani Alechem. They said we'll make you take an oath. The Amro Amen. And they said, Amen, bein b'fnei bezdin, bein shelo b'fnei bezdin, mipi atzmo, bein mipi atzmo, bein mipi acherem. Kivin she'kafar b'hem chayavin, divrei Rebbe Meir. So here, according to this source, even if it's mipi acherem outside of bezdin, and you say amen, you're liable. So according to the first source, Rebbe Meir says outside of bezdin, you have to take the oath yourself. But according to the second source, we say mipi acherem is okay outside of bezdin. How do we explain it? Because is a contradiction of Rebbe Meir. Depends if you said amen. In the first case where it's not good, it's because you didn't say amen when others made you take the oath. But in the second case, you said amen, and so the oath is valid. Our Mishnah right here on Chavtes Amabeis, you could also infer the same idea. The Katani. Shevuos Bito, I know Haggis, Banashim, Uvanashim, or Chokim, or Krovim. The Shevuos Bito applies all these cases. Bikshir and Ubipsula and Bifnei Bezdin, Vishalo Bifnei Bezdin, in front of court, outside of court. Mipi Atmo, which implies in the first clause of the Mishnah that applies outside of Bezdin, only Mipi Atzmo in, Mipi Achermo, but not from others. The Katani Seifa, Zevzem Mushma, Mipi Acherem Chai. But the Seifa says that if you're sworn by others, you're liable. So the Reisha says if others make you take the oath, you're exempt. Seifa says you're liable. Kashin Hadadi, isn't it an internal contradiction? So it must be that if you say amen, then you're liable. If you didn't say amen, you're not liable. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, if it's so obvious from our Mishnah and from the synchronization of the Mishnah and the Brisa, then what's Shmuel even telling us? So the Gemara says, yeah, he's telling us how to read the Mishnah. We might have not known how to read the Mishnah until Shmuel came along and told us how to read it. We'll return to you, Shevuos Shtayim. We'll stop here until Rabbi Yosef